Hello everyone. Today I'm here with an interpretation of yet another poem from your textbook First Flight. This poem is entitled Fog and it is written by Carl Sandburg. Dear students, before we explore the poem Fog, let us have a discussion on its title, that is, Fog. Alright? So, in plain speak or in everyday language, what does fog stand for? What does it symbolize? As you all know, fog consists of tiny droplets of water suspended in the air. As such, fog is nothing but a condition of weather. At the same time, let us remember that fog is, after all, a manifestation of beautiful nature. Next, let me talk about thickness of fog and how it leads to an obscurity in terms of our visibility. Let us all picturize this in our mind right now. Imagine that it is a cold, wintry morning and you had already made up your mind to go for a long drive along with some of your friends. So, on that particular morning, you wake up early and then get ready for the long drive. However, the moment you step out of your house, you find that the entire area is engulfed by a thick fog, which leads to an obscurity in your visibility. That means you cannot see through the fog, and the fog presents itself as a big challenge in front of you. Alright? Next, let me talk about the element of uncertainty that is associated with the image of fog. Now, as human beings, it is really difficult for us to comprehend the nature of fog. We do not know for certain what we may have to encounter beyond the fog. So, we exactly do not know what lies ahead of us through the fog, and hence there is always an element of uncertainty that looms large whenever we talk about fog. Alright. Now, this point of uncertainty can also be extended to another point, that is, the mysterious nature of fog. Now, as I have told you just now, the nature of fog is quite unpredictable. As human beings, we find it really difficult to comprehend or to understand the true nature of fog. And that is why fog always assumes a different kind of persona altogether. That is, it always has an aura of mystery and enigma surrounded by it. Alright. Next, let me talk about foggy issue. Now, what exactly is meant by a foggy issue? We can call a particular matter or issue to be foggy when we are not sure of what the matter or the issue is all about. That means nothing is clearly known to us. We do not know who is going to hide the reality picture from us. So in that particular context, we can say the issue or the matter is really foggy as we do not know clearly about it. Alright. Finally, let me address the point mental fog. Now, you are in a position of mental fogging when you do not understand other people's feelings, sentiments, wishes, and desires. So, when your perspective is clouded by narrow mindedness, it means that you are in a state of mental fogging. So, in that particular situation, you cannot empathize with other people. Alright? It is because you are being surrounded by a sense of prejudice or an indifferent attitude. You lack in feelings of sensitivity or sensible nature. Alright. So these are the common perceptions whenever we think about the word fog. So by having this discussion, I have actually tried to form a mental picture of different fabrications of thoughts and ideas in your mind when it comes to the image of fog. Mind you, dear children, these are only relative ideas. So, your perceptions or ideas about the matter of fog might vary from person to person. Whatever it is, let us all remember that these could be the common ideas with which we all can very well associate the element or the nature of fog. So, with this basic introduction to the title of the poem Fog, let us now understand about the poem Fog in details. Alright. So, let me begin with a reading of the poem Fog by Carl Sandburg. Here it goes. Fog. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. Dear students, let us now learn something about the poet who composed this poem Fog. So, Carl Sandburg was an American poet, biographer, journalist, and editor. He won 3 Pulitzer Prizes, 2 for his poetry and 1 for his biography of Abraham Lincoln, which is one of the monumental works of the century. During his lifetime, Sandburg was widely regarded as a major figure in contemporary literature, especially for volumes of his collected verse, including Chicago Poems, Cornhuskers, and Smoke and Steel. Sandburg enjoyed unrivaled appeal as a poet in his day, perhaps because the breadth of his experiences connected him with so many strands of American life. And at his death in 1967, President Lyndon B. Johnson observed that Carl Sandburg was more than the voice of America, more than the poet of its strength and genius. He was America. Trying to write briefly about Carl Sandburg, said a friend of the poet, is like trying to picture the Grand Canyon in one black and white snapshot. His range of interest was enumerated by his close friend Harry Golden, who, in his study of the poet, called Sandburg the one American writer who distinguished himself in 5 fields: poetry, history, biography, fiction, and music. Sandburg was ahead of most of his fellow poets in his interest in American folk song and lore. He collected some 300 folk songs and ballads in the American Song Bag, and he often gave public recitals accompanying himself on the guitar. Now, here is a brief note on the poem Fog. So, let us read and understand what this introduction is all about. The poem Fog by Carl Sandburg first appeared in his first mainstream collection of poems entitled Chicago Poems, which was published in the year 1916. Sandburg described how the idea for the poem struck his mind. One day, carrying a book of Japanese haiku, which refers to a Japanese poetic form, he went to interview a juvenile court judge. To reach the location at which the interview was to take place, he had to cut through Grand Park, and he saw the fog over Chicago Harbor. It was not that Sandburg had seen fog for the first time, but this time he had to wait 40 minutes for the judge, and he only had a piece of newsprint handy. So he decided to create an American haiku about it. The poem consists of two stanzas of variable length. The first stanza is made up of two lines. On the other hand, the second stanza is made up of four lines. Hence, the entire poem consists of 6 lines in total. So, my dear students, let us now try to analyze the poem Fog stanza-wise. And here let me begin with the explanation of the first part of the poem, that is, stanza 1 of the poem Fog. As you all can see, the first stanza of this poem consists of just 2 lines, and these lines are: the fog comes on little cat feet. So, let me explain what these lines mean. Alright. In this stanza, the poet describes the arrival of the fog towards the city of Chicago. As we all know, fog consists of tiny droplets of water suspended in the air. Hence, it is a fluid, and fluids move in a flowing manner. Their movement has no solid manifestations. That is why it seems to the poet that the fog is gliding towards the city. He compares this gliding movement to the movement of a cat, which is a very apt comparison. Moreover, a cat is known to move surreptitiously. This is easy for the cat to do, since the padding under its paws is very soft and delicate, and it does not make any noise while the cat is moving. Similarly, the fog is also approaching the city of Chicago silently but surely. Alright? Now, I want all of you to focus on two of the key words in this explanation of the first stanza of the poem. Alright? Let me first draw your attention to the word gliding movement. Alright? The poet has compared the gliding movement of the fog to the movement of a cat. Now, what do you mean by gliding? Let me tell you that gliding brings to our mind an image of the fog moving in an effortless manner. So, the way the fog approaches the city, it seems to the poet that it is an easy kind of a movement, very silent, quiet, and effortless movement on the part of the fog. Same with the cat. The cat also moves in a similar fashion, right? And that is why the poet has made this beautiful comparison of the movement of the fog with that of a cat's movement. Alright. Secondly, look at the word surreptitiously. This means secretively. A cat is known to move surreptitiously. The line means that a cat is known for its secretive movements. You know, the way a cat moves along, it is very difficult for people to understand its nature. There is always an aura of mystery that surrounds the movement of a cat. Literally speaking, by looking at its movement, no one can exactly predict what a cat is going to do. So there is the right use of the word surreptitious in this context. Alright? And once again, the poet has made the comparison of the movement of the fog to the movement of a cat, by which means he wants to highlight that just like a cat has an aura of mystery and silence around it, in the similar way, fog also carries about it an element, an aura of suspense and mystery all the time. Alright? So, this is what we have understood from the first part of the poem, Fog. Let us now take up the second part of the poem, Fog, that is, its second stanza. As you all can see, the second stanza of the poem comprises of 4 lines, which go like this. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. So, let me now explain this part of the poem. Alright? In this stanza, the poet describes the way in which the fog engulfs the city only for a while and then it retreats. He continues the comparison of the fog with the cat. The poet says that just like a cat, the fog sits on its haunches for a while and looks over the city of Chicago and its harbor. A cat is generally a very cautious creature, and therefore it cannot sit and relax in one place. Unlike dogs, they never even rest their bodies entirely on any surface, choosing instead to squat on their haunches. The fog is also a temporary visitor to Chicago, and that shows very clearly in its movement. It does not settle down anywhere. Instead, it only hovers over the city of Chicago, as if encompassing the whole city with its overpowering persona. As silently and surreptitiously as it had come, the fog leaves Chicago soon enough. Hence, even in its retreat, its movement resembles the movement of a cat. That is why the poet's use of this extended metaphor is absolutely appropriate to describe the fog he has seen over Chicago. So, my dear students, let us now have a look at some of the important keywords in this part of the explanation of the poem. Alright? First of all, let me draw your attention to the word haunches. The fog arrives in the city of Chicago and then it sits on its haunches for a while. Haunches mean hips. Alright? Now, what does the fog do after it sits for a while? The fog looks over the city of Chicago and its harbor. It encompasses the entire area with its overpowering persona. So, by referring to this particular nature of the fog, the poet has actually attributed a sort of grandeur to this element of nature. What I mean to say is that the fog here assumes an altogether different character and persona. Alright. Secondly, you all need to remember the exact movement of the cat along with the movement of the fog, right? As we all have noticed, the fog arrives in the city of Chicago in a very silent way. And this particular movement of the fog resembles the movement of a cat. Again, when the fog dissipates and it goes away from the city, it once again has the same sort of movement. Alright? So, while in its retreat also, the movement of the fog resembles the movement of a cat. This is something that all of you need to keep in mind. Even in its arrival and in its retreat from the city of Chicago, the fog's movement is just like the movement of a cat. And that is why we can very well conclude that in this poem, Fog, the poet has made use of the extended metaphor of the cat, which is indeed a very appropriate comparison, undoubtedly. Alright, so this is what we have understood from the second stanza of this poem, Fog. Alright, dear students, Let me now discuss with you all about some other aspects of the poem Fog. Alright? The poet Carl Sandburg has called this poem an American haiku. A haiku is a Japanese poetic form traditionally made up of 3 lines and evoking images of the natural world. Sandburg makes use of extended metaphor in this poem, fog, as he compares the fog with the concrete image of a cat. These are both dissimilar things, yet their comparison seems quite apt to us. The only way in which Sandburg deviates from a traditional haiku is to extend its length from 3 lines to 6 lines. However, in any case, each of his lines is very short, yet profound in its meaning. The poem Fog was published in 1916 at the height of the First World War. Hence, it would not be wrong to assume that such a major historical event must have been at the back of Sandburg's mind while writing this poem. This was the first war in which there was such massive destruction of property and loss of young lives, and people really didn't know what to expect next or when it would all come to an end. Hence, the fog could be a symbol of the fear that was present in people's mind about the Great War. Alright? So, let us now try to appreciate the poem Fog from a different perspective. Dear students, the poem Fog expresses the poet's fascination for nature and its wonders. Even a simple natural phenomenon like fog captures the poet's imagination, and he pens down this exquisite piece of poetry. I think herein lies the greatness of poetry and the artistry of poets like Carl Sandburg. Poets can invariably transform even an ordinary thing into an incredible object of appreciation. And that is exactly what the poet Carl Sandburg has strived for in this tiny fragment of a poem entitled Fog, which we are reading at the moment. As you all have seen, the poem Fog is a simple and short poem comprising of just 6 lines, split into 2 stanzas and woven around merely 21 words. On the face of it, there seems to be nothing substantial about the poem. However, as we read the poem again and again and try to comprehend it better, a whole new meaning resurfaces and we are left wonderstruck. Well, to continue with our appreciation of the poem, let me tell you that the poem Fog is an extended metaphor, as the poet Carl Sandburg has used the metaphor of the cat all throughout the poem. He perceives the fog as a cat that comes on tiny, silent feet, as cats do most of the times when they are stalking, for example. Only an animal like a cat can move in such a way, almost imperceptibly and in complete silence. Now, why is the comparison with a cat? It is undoubtedly because a cat is an independent animal. It does not follow any rules. It invades into our lives, our personal space, of course, uninvited, as and when it pleases, oblivious to our liking or disliking, just like the fog, which has no boundaries. Moreover, cats are stealthy creatures, which means they are secretive and cautious about every move of theirs. They move in slow motions most of the times, always carrying an aura of mystery about them. They are also in the habit of sneaking into a particular place, which provides them an overview of that entire area. They can sit for hours in that elevated state, as if in a trance, absorbing or taking in all that happens at one stroke. Fog likewise moves in a slow pace and then it stops, encompassing the whole area with its overpowering nature, enveloping it with a sudden air of mystery and silence all this while, before making an abrupt retreat. You cannot literally see through it, much like trying to understand a cat. Neither you can predict its exact movement or its precise course of action. Also, cats move on at their own pace, taking their own sweet time in a leisurely and relaxed way, completely at ease with themselves, carefree, unmindful, and self contained. However, if they want to move on, they can really do so on their own terms. And before one can realize about it, they can disappear in an instant and get out of our sight in no time, leaving behind an intangible aura of its own. Same with the fog. Maybe that is why the poet has drawn a comparison between fog and a cat, which is indeed a well chosen analogy by all means. Alright? Dear students, as with any other poem, the poem Fog can also be interpreted in diverse ways. Mostly, the poem represents change, a moment of change. As you all can see, everything about the poem is changing. The weather changes when the fog sets in unexpectedly. Soon after, it changes back to normal, with the fog dissipating suddenly. Fog as such is ephemeral in nature, which means that the existence of fog is short-lived. It arrives all at once and then disappears right away. This transition takes place so abruptly that we are almost caught unawares. Herein, we can draw an analogy or comparison between fog and human life. Well, we all have little patches of fog in our life, and we must overcome them and respond to changes with a positive attitude. It also brings to light the underlying truth of human life, that difficult times do not stay forever. Just like the fog enveloping the whole city for a while and making a hasty retreat. In the similar way, times of difficulties and hardships intrude on our life from time to time, leaving us shattered and making us feel disheartened and crestfallen. However, it does not sustain for long. No matter how intense or overpowering such a setback turns out to be, eventually this too passes. A time definitely comes in our life when all such difficult phase of our life gives way to a new beginning, and then we end up smiling back at this wonderful gift called life once again. Over and above this, everyone must admit that life itself is an unpredictable turn of events. We do not know what destiny has in store for all of us in the future. Destiny, as such, is beyond our grasp and control. One cannot really predict our times ahead or what lies in the course of our life in the near future. Just the way we cannot ascertain what we may encounter through the fog or what we may come across beyond any occurrence of fog. So, there is always an element of uncertainty when it comes to the situations in our life as well as the natural phenomenon of fog. Hence, the analogy between fog and human life. Dear students, let me now discuss about the use of literary devices or poetic devices in the poem Fog. Firstly, let me draw your attention to the use of the poetic device called metaphor. As you all know, metaphor is a figure of speech that makes an implicit comparison between two things which are apparently unrelated but which share some common features. In the poem Fog, the poet has compared fog to that of a cat. In fact, let me tell you that The poet here has made an extensive use of the metaphor of the cat, and so it is a perfect example of an extended metaphor here. Alright. Secondly, let me talk about another poetic device which is called enjambment. Now, enjambment refers to the figure of speech in which a sentence is continued without a pause beyond the end of a particular line. As you all have seen, the poem Fog is a very short poem consisting of just 6 lines. And as you all have noticed, here in this poem, a sentence continues to the next line without a pause. And so it is the poetic device of enjambment being used in the poem. Alright? Thirdly, let me talk about the poetic device of personification. Alright. Now, in the poem Fog written by Carl Sandburg, the poet has attributed human quality to the inanimate entity of fog. Alright? You just see, the fog arrives in the city, then it sits on its haunches, and then it just looks around twice to encompass the whole city with its overwhelming presence. So, the fog here assumes an altogether different persona or character, just like a human being. And that is why it is a perfect example of the poetic device called personification. Finally, it is the use of the poetic device called transferred epithet. Alright, look at these two words, silent haunches. Now, literally speaking, the haunches of the cat cannot be silent. Rather, it is the animal cat itself which is very quiet and silent in its movement as well as in its overall bearing. Alright, so here we can see the perfect use of the poetic device transferred epithet, as the poet has transferred the epithet or the adjective from one word to another word with which it is closely associated with in the sentence. Alright, remember, the cat's haunches are not silent. Rather, it is the cat itself which is keeping very quiet and silent, and hence it is transferred epithet. Now, let us all remember another very significant aspect about this poem Fog. Alright? The poem Fog does not follow any particular rhyme scheme. It is written in free verse. Alright? This is something that all of you need to keep in mind. Alright? So, dear students, with this I have come to the end of the explanation of the poem Fog written by Carl Sandburg. I hope you all have enjoyed this appreciation of poetry. With this note, let me take your leave right now. Thank you.